We begin with tragedy at a newspaper office in Maryland. At least 5 people are dead after a gunman opened fire on employees.
Their house is infested by bats.
Bats. So we sent 12 News reporter Jordan Foster there to find out what is going on.
So you've checked their background and got a fair market rate on your property. But what happens if your tenant is more of a headache than it's worth?
You can see how it is just covering my boots, how deep this water is going.
First, we want to tell you, no need to panic. There is going to be enough water to go around.
Well, thieves strike again. This time, they left behind broken glass and some broken hearts. The Jasper County Sheriff's Office has taken action following a fight between 2 girls at Beaumont High School. Video leaked to 12 News appears to show administrators not stepping in to stop the fight back in February. Well, today, the superintendent defended those administrators. He says they simply just didn't see the fight.
So singing our fan pick, Cry For You, he's got the looks, he's got the style, he is the voice, DeJonique!
$75. Hold up, wait a minute, let me put some Deja in it. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Good job.
All right.
All right.
All right, we good. Not bad. We gonna take this way?
Let me spank some men.
Good pop.
Bam!
Boom. Chop it in there.
There you go.
What happens when the need for housing and Section 8 vouchers outweighs the inventory? We spent months talking to officials along with people in the program while crunching the numbers to get to the bottom of the perils in public housing.
Yeah.
Gazing from the stoop of his home on the corner of Avenue G, Brandon Johnson takes a trip down memory lane, thinking about how he got his start in real estate.
When I was younger, I would assist my older cousin Chris with remodel and change out light fixtures and things like that, and some of the properties that he would buy.
Now, instead of watching, he's working, renovating properties all across the city of Beaumont so that people like Michelle Richard can get a leg up.
I may have smiled a lot, but inside I was hurting.
Hurting because after years of enduring abuse at the hands of her husband, Richard decided to leave, loading her car with her belongings, 5 children, and hopes of a better future in Texas. She was finally approved for a Section 8 voucher, but finding a landlord to accept it would be another task.
There was a house that I was interested in, and I just feel like once the man found out I had 5 children, then it was like, it's not available. It is hard to find somewhere to stay with your voucher.
According to Beaumont's Department of Housing and Urban Development, there are currently 1,700 families in the voucher program just within the city. The problem is there are only about 500 active landlords that are accepting tenants. The reason?
Well, there must be drug addicts. They must be pimping, hooking, troublemakers.
This is Robert Reyna. He has been at the helm of HUD for decades and says there are 2 main reasons there's such a huge shortage in Beaumont: stereotypes and Harvey. The public housing waiting list in September of 2017, right before the storm, was 2,910 people. Post-storm, it's 7,936. That is a 172% increase in applicants. The Section 8 waiting list has been closed since 2016 because of funding, but that hasn't stopped more than 5,000 more people from applying. Same for Port Arthur, where officials say close to 2,400 families are waiting to be housed.
As for those stereotypes, let's verify fact versus fiction. First, is it likely that your Section 8 tenant will be trouble? Mr. Johnson says,
In the 8 years I've been a landlord, I've only had 1 Section 8 tenant that was a problem for me.
HUD does background checks on every adult living in a Section 8 home before they can enter the program. And as a landlord, you have a right to dig even deeper.
Credit check. Their previous tenancy check.
all fair game. Next, since vouchers are based on fair market value, does a landlord have a better chance of getting more cash in hand from renters who pay out of pocket? That depends, but landlords do have options.
They can request an increase. It will be granted as long as it is rent reasonable.
Johnson says he did just that on one of his properties and got more cash, reliable cash.
First Friday of every month, you will get a direct deposit.
So you've checked their background and got a fair market rate on your property. But what happens if your tenant is more of a headache than it's worth? A lot of landlords think because of the voucher, they're stuck. But Rena says you have rights.
The contract is between the owner and the tenant. If I, the tenant, violate my lease, you can evict me.
With all of those odds stacked against her, Richard managed to prevail. While using her Section 8 voucher, she took classes on financial literacy and home ownership. And after months of prayer and patience, she and her children now have a place to call their own, something she says would not have been possible without a hand up from the Section 8 program.
Give everybody a chance and try to lift people up, you know, try to help other people because one day you may need the help.
12 News anchor DeJonique Garrison investigates just how effective the system was at the height of the storm.
I am flooding in my nursing home. I have a small fire in the back of my nursing home. I need help. The water is in your apartment? It's just a scary situation.
In a normal, everyday circumstance, if you dial 911, your call is going to be answered in probably less than 3 rings.
For Southeast Texas, Hurricane Harvey was everything but normal.
Port Arthur 911, where is your emergency?
For days, 13 call dispatchers relied on 6 phone lines to play middleman between your frantic calls and emergency responders. So with more than 23,000 calls pouring into the center over the span of the storm's peak, that 3-ring standard doubled, tripled, and in some cases went on indefinitely.
Call may ring, 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 but you need to go into survival mode. You need to start worrying about trying to get yourself to safety.
Lee Coney says she experienced that agony firsthand.
You're taught to call 911, you know, if you need help and everything, and just not knowing what's going to happen, you know, not knowing if we're even going to make it. Are they going to send somebody? You can't explain that to them.
Coney says she was ironing clothes when the water started to seep through the crevices of her Port Arthur home. As she tried to figure out what to do next, her aunt, like many of you, messaged our 12 News Facebook page begging for help.
It was coming fast, like really fast. Within another 30 minutes, it was like ankle deep in the house.
By nightfall, the water chased Coney and her 4 boys to the roof, trying to flag down some help. And for hours, she says she dialed 911.
I didn't get a hold of anybody.
And she's not alone. The 12 News investigative team filed a Freedom of Information request with the Port Arthur Police Department asking for a log of all emergency calls that came in between August 29th and September 1st. Here's what we found. Out of the 23,126 calls taken, nearly 12,000 were either disconnected before reaching a dispatcher or went unanswered.
I'm not ignoring you, ma'am. I have everything going on. The phone lines are ringing. I'm pretty sure you can probably hear that. Just bear with me. I apologize.
Some residents say they believe operators were even hanging up on callers. So we asked Pete Delacruz, director of the Southeast Texas 911 network, if this was true. His response?
No, the call takers are so professional. All the calls, you know, in the region are recorded, so there would be documentation for something like that.
Delacruz says the fact of the matter is, as the water rose, so did call volumes and wait times.
We could see from the numbers for the individual agencies that water rescues in the areas that were impacted by the storm flooding is where the larger increases in call volume took place.
Taking a look at the region as a whole, 911 calls increased by 548%. So we took a closer look at Port Arthur. With 13 dispatchers juggling 23,000 calls, that's an average of 1,770 calls per worker over 4 days. So to put that number into perspective, those same dispatchers would have only taken about 44 calls for the entire week prior to Harvey. Do we need more 911 dispatchers?
I think the system is sized appropriately for the need in Southeast Texas. That event was so large in scale that even if we had an extra 50 911 positions in Southeast Texas, it still would have been inundated by the call volume.
And if you compare cities that are similar to the size of Port Arthur, the agency appears to be staffed to similar lengths. Texas City has 10 dispatchers while Galveston has 17. Port Arthur falls right in the middle with 13. Little consolation for Coney and her 4 children.
It's a big letdown, felt like they didn't care at all.
Port Arthur's mayor says that after wading through the water of this catastrophic storm, not only does he care, but he knows there's room for improvement.
We're definitely going to look into more lines.
Along with adding more lines, Freeman says officials are working on creating an emergency operations center and increasing the number of dispatchers and emergency responders. But there's one problem.
Before the storm hit, we were short dozens of officers already.
So now it's a matter of working to fully staff agencies and create a reserve for emergencies so that people like Coney never feel forgotten again.
If there was a time when the city wasn't able to get to you and you felt that we were doing something to slight you or something adverse against you, we apologize.
An apology Lee Coney says she accepts, but doesn't know if it's enough to bring her back to the only city she's ever known.
After that happened, I can't see myself going back. Because what if, something happens again?
In Port Arthur, DeJonique Garrison, 12 News.
Do you know what started the race riot?
I think it was about a black man and a white woman, I guess.
Yeah, that a black man had raped a white woman. Oh.
She said that he raped her. Charlie raped her.
That's the way 87-year-old Sidney Jones and his younger brother Sonny remember it too. Like most other boys their age, the Jones brothers would soon head off to fight for Lady Liberty, but not before experiencing the wrath of homegrown oppression and terror in their own backyard.
Me and Sonny was going to work. I don't know where we was going. And those guys said, where y'all going? So
we said, we going to work. And so they said, don't you know, y'all get back home. And so we went back home. And later on in the day, we found out, what was going on.
What was going on was a riot. Let's set the stage. Business was booming in Beaumont thanks to wartime work, bringing nearly 20,000 new faces to the Texas Gulf Coast. But that spike in population agitated a fierce feud between blacks and whites fighting for city services.
There's a sign up there, colored, white.
Limited housing and inadequate access to food.
We had food, we had the WPA, this welfare thing. We go, I'll never forget, it was on Fountain and Railroad. Me and my brother go up there on the day. We had to get behind white people. They was poorer than we. But we had to get behind to go get our lot.
When you couple those factors with a regional Ku Klux Klan rally crossing paths with the annual Juneteenth celebration, J.H. Colton, head of the Food Administration, felt the need to send a memo to Washington, foreshadowing what he thought was to come. Once word spread that a white woman had been raped by a black man, Beaumont became ground zero for one of several race riots that swept across America during the summer of 1943.
Hear it all. It was terrible. Was it just noise? Shooting and screaming and yeah.
According to historic records from the city of Beaumont, close to 2,000 men marched from the Pennsylvania shipyard near the river to the city jail to punish the alleged rapists by hanging. Records show not only did the guards refuse to release the prisoner, his accuser could not make a positive identification, so the group took justice into their own hands.
All these main Negro streets, Forsyth, Gladys, and Irving. That's where all the Negroes hung out at, and that's where all these white folks came.
Witnesses tell historians they came wreaking havoc. Black homes were ransacked, black businesses were burned, and black people were terrorized.
Some had hoods on their heads, but they all had bats, they all had rocks, they all had Molotov cocktail, and they were all white.
Catherine Combs recalls the memories of the riot passed down from her grandfather, R.D. Tapman. Now, Tapman owned a hamburger joint that once stood in this very spot. As the rioters made their way past his business into black neighborhoods, Combs says her grandfather refused to stand on the wrong side of history. So he jumped in his car and drove to the neighborhood where his black cook cowered in terror.
He got the cook, the wife, and the 2 small children. And when he came back out, they were waiting for him again. And he had all the family laid out on the floorboard so that they would not be seen or hurt. And he said, "I'm coming through," and he floorboarded it. Just went right through the barricades.
As the violent mob began to swell, 1,800 guardsmen, 100 state police, and 75 Texas Rangers were dispatched to Beaumont. Things got so bad that Texas Governor A.M. Aiken was forced to place the city under martial law from June 15th through the 20th, according to records from the Texas State Historical Association. A curfew of 8:30 was set, and no one was allowed in or out of town.
They came by in the truck and started throwing bricks, hollering, "Let's get inside."
And that's exactly what Sydney and Sonny Jones say they were trying to do. When the pair finally made it home to the South End, Jones says his neighbors were ready to defend what they'd worked their entire lives to build.
No damage done to the South End.
Because the blacks were guarding the streets?
They was guarding. In the ditches at night, they was laying out there with guns all the way to Sabine Pass.
Were you scared?
No, I wasn't scared because they was on guard.
Not everyone was as brave as Mr. Jones. Combs says her grandfather never forgot the effect the riot had on his cook's little girls.
The 2 small children would not come out from under my grandmother's bed for 2 days. They were so frightened.
And they weren't alone. Once the 5-day period of martial law was lifted, word is thousands of blacks packed up and left town for good. But Beaumont officials say given the transient nature of the town in 1943, it's tough to pin down exactly how many locals never came back. When it was all said and done, 200 businesses were destroyed, 300 people were arrested, and 200 others were hurt. 2 men paid the ultimate price with their lives during the riot, with another one passing away a few months later because of his injuries.
If R.D. Tapman were still here today, what do you think he would feel about our current state?
Oh, he would be so frustrated. He would be so frustrated because it just doesn't have to be this way. What can we do? Keep telling the story.
A story that unites Combs to the Jones brothers, who had to endure visceral acts of violence and overcame the shackles of segregation. Exactly 20 years after the riots, Sonny would go on to become one of the men who integrated the very transit system that played a part in sparking the riot. But he was determined to make his way to the front of the bus.
I knew my position in society. I knew what the world thought about me, but it didn't determine what I could do.
People need to try. They need to try to learn what their history was so we don't continue to repeat. That's my wish. That's my wish.
A wish that Jones says is within reach if we all just follow the golden rule.
Love thy neighbor as thyself. And that's the only thing that's gonna fix what's wrong with our society.
In Beaumont, DeJonique Garrison, 12 News.